Jose, which is still a minimal hurricane this morning, and now the National Hurricane Center cone shows this little arc to the north eventually. What about the other models? Is Jose going to flirt with the U.S. coastline? Well, but there's a lot of model differences here. Some of the models move Jose closer to the U.S. coastline next week. For instance, here's the GFS, and I'll show you a close-up on that in just a second. That is certainly a concern to the North Carolina and the Middle Atlantic coastal region. This is next Tuesday, showing a hurricane as Jose flirts with the Middle Atlantic coastal region. Wouldn't that be interesting? And it shows it coming ashore near, let's say, Virginia Beach on September 22nd. That would be late next week. What about the global model, the European? It shows even a stronger hurricane flirting with the Middle Atlantic coastal region late next week. Oh, my gosh, that would be...
And this Fox News alert after Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, forecasters are watching yet another storm.
Amazing. Hurricane Jose is moving across the Atlantic Ocean.
We're looking at a Category 1 hurricane at this point. It's sitting right there. That is where we're looking at right now. The motion expected to do a little loop out in the Atlantic and then turn and head back towards the U.S. You do see a final turn where perhaps it looks like it's turning away, and actually most of the models are agreeing with that turning away from the U.S., but anytime you get that close, we're going to be paying very close attention to it. This is what we call our spaghetti model. So this is a whole bunch of models plotting the potential movement of this system. You see it making that loop, running back up along the East Coast. None of them have it actually going into the East Coast, but when you get this close to perhaps New York, Boston, we really start to pay attention to it. This is taking you all the way into Sunday, so we still have a little bit of time for these to move, and we'll be paying very close attention to it.
Hurricane Jose is still doing a clockwise loop in the western Atlantic. Wind 75 miles per hour. It's a Category 1, but breathe a sigh of relief. Right now, the majority of the models are keeping this safely offshore along the coast of the southeast. So no worries about this one as of yet. It is still hurricane strength, expected to weaken into a tropical storm by this weekend, but notice the path. It stays well offshore. Now, we could see some high swells through the weekend, so that is something we'll have to watch for along the southeast coast, Charleston up to Hatteras, and even to Atlantic City. You could see some wave heights in excess of about 3 to 6 feet.
You know, there is another storm out there. It's Jose, but most experts are pretty confused just trying to get a sense of where it is going. To the weather company senior meteorologist Dan Leonard. Dan, are you worried about this thing? How's it looking to you?
To be honest, Neil, it doesn't look too bad. Right now, it's milling around underneath a big ridge of high pressure, which is keeping it at bay. So right now, for the next 3, 4, 5 days, it stays well offshore. There are some models that try to bring it in close to the Carolinas next weekend or maybe into early next week. But right now, I think probably the chance of an impact to the east coast of the U.S. is roughly around 10%. So I think we're going to dodge a bullet with Jose. Not out of the woods quite yet. A couple of more days worth of model runs and we can be sure that it's a fish storm. But right now, I'd say it's a pretty fair bet that most east coast cities are safe from Jose.
You know, I'm showing my ignorance here, but it comes in handy because I am when it comes to this stuff. But Dan, how do you know? I mean, how closer to a potential hit or potential turn do you look at a storm like Jose? Because I've seen all the tracking models, and it really looks like a bad Etch-a-Sketch here where it could go any one of, 24 different directions. What decides it for you? What do you look for in the next few days?
Yeah, those spaghetti models are the bane of meteorologists' existence because the amateur viewer, you look at that and you say,
very smart.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, it could go anywhere basically. But let me put it this way: there are certain models that we look at, and then there are the ones that we ignore. The spaghetti models don't take into account which ones are the good ones and which ones aren't so good. So I will say this: there's a couple of models that did really well with Irma, tracking Irma, and those are the ones that you sort of look at down the road and say, okay, it did really well with Irma. Let's see what it's doing for Jose. Keeps it offshore, so I think we're good. But having said that, remember with Irma, even up at the last couple of days before landfall, we weren't exactly sure where it was going to go. So you can get some pretty significant changes. Obviously, in the days leading up to Irma, those changes were in the good direction because you had landfall, probably best case scenario, right? I mean, if it's going to hit Florida, might as well hit down in the Everglades and force all the storm surge up through there. Spare Miami, spare the big West Coast cities, and it's the best case scenario. But you can get fairly significant changes, especially 4, 5, 6 days out. So it's not something that we can take our eyes off, obviously.
Irma's beginning to wind down over the next couple of days, and now lots of eyes are turning towards the Atlantic and the next hurricane that's out at sea, Hurricane Jose, which has been following behind Irma and at times has been a major hurricane. Now, as of the 11 a.m. advisory on Monday, it's a Category 2 storm, maximum sustained winds 105 miles an hour, and you see here, very close to where the path of Irma was, just a couple of 100 miles further back to the north and west. But here's the deal with Jose. It's going to end up turning away from the United States, but then making a loop in the middle of the Atlantic. The steering currents send it in that direction. Then Jose will make a turn back towards the west. And as we take that cone of uncertainty out 5 days, by Saturday morning, it could be anywhere between the Bahamas and all the way up in the Atlantic, halfway in between the U.S. and Bermuda. So is it going to end up being a fish storm, or could there be impacts along the U.S.? Because that cone of uncertainty sure looks scary, right? Looks like it's heading towards Florida. I want to show you the computer models, though, to explain what likely will end up happening with Jose if current model trends hold true. Jose will make that loop in the Atlantic, come closer to the Bahamas, but then the models into the weekend have Jose turning back to the north. And if this path holds true, Jose would end up being a fish storm in between Bermuda and the eastern seaboard. Could that still pose some impacts? Maybe a little rough surf on the Atlantic side of the U.S., but we'll have to watch it very closely because the average cone of uncertainty 5 days out has a track error more than 200 miles. A lot can change between now and this weekend, but we're certainly watching it close.
Today is actually weakened some. It's now a Category 1 hurricane, and here you can also see how it's moving off to the east, away from the Bahamas, away from the east coast of the United States. But the way things are going to set up in terms of the jet stream and blocking high pressure, it's going to actually be doing a loop. So yes, it's moving this way, but then it's going to start coming back. But how far back will it come before it then moves north? Does not look like it's going to get too close to the Bahamas. Something we'll have to watch, though, is it could very well pass somewhere between the Carolinas and Bermuda. Might be the best bet right now. As you can see, all of the models are kind of tracking it pretty far off the coast right now as we get into the weekend and the first half of next week. But that's still a long way off and certainly bears watching.
This is more so going to complete, again, that loop. And notice the path here takes it throughout the western Atlantic over the course of the next couple of days. We can take this full screen. This is expected to, again, remain a minimal hurricane. We're going to be talking about rough surf and rip currents toward Bermuda and also for the eastern seaboard. And again, we should still be monitoring, again, the future track, again, of Jose. Again, as there are many different variables in play here with this system the next several days.
Watching Hurricane Jose, and it's well off to our east and then a wave a few hundred miles to the west of the Cape Verde Islands that just has a low potential of development. Hurricane Jose, I know many of you are concerned about it. It's a weakening Category 1 and forecast to become a tropical storm, move off to the east and then down south and then back west as a Category 1 as we get into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, more of a northwesterly path here. And even at that point, the cone is to the north and east of the Bahamas. So, you know, anytime we have a storm that's here out in the Atlantic, we have to keep a close eye on it. We'll keep you updated. For right now, though, it is not a threat to us or to South Florida. Some of the models keep it doing that loop back around towards the east, the south, the west, and the northwest. Most of the models are keeping it away from the U.S. and moving out into the open waters of the Atlantic, but we'll keep you updated with any changes.
And this is a hurricane that's off the coast, way off the east coast, that we're keeping an eye on. And this one, we'll monitor it, but at this point, it doesn't appear to be any kind of threat. And the latest computer models indicate that it'll actually stay even farther off the coastline than it looked a couple of days ago. A lot of people were asking me a few days ago, why aren't you talking about this storm? Well, we were concentrating on Irma because Irma was here, and this one at no time appeared to be any kind of threat to Florida. I mean, if we were in a cone for Jose, obviously we'd be talking about it. But at that point, it was never a threat, and it was unlikely to be a threat. So why concentrate on that when you have a threat right over you? So here's a look. It's about 800 miles away from South Florida. So why are we talking about it now? Well, we're going to monitor it for you, but it looks like it'll do a kind of a weird but a big turn just east of the Bahamas, and then eventually track up toward the Carolinas after that and stay far enough away from South Florida. Bizarre track, very reminiscent of a storm back in 2004, Gene, which also did a loop. Unfortunately, that one hit South Florida. This one looks like it should stay far off the coastline, just the way we like them, way out there, and no impact at all, although it may come close to Bermuda, so they'll be watching.
Quick note on Hurricane Jose spinning out in the Atlantic, and it should continue to spin in the Atlantic. It's just kind of a bully, if you will, just kind of teasing us here over the southeastern United States. Weakening back to a tropical storm by Friday, it will continue its loop and then exit to the north and east, potentially bringing some extra rainfall cloud cover to Bermuda, but hopefully not posing any threats to the lower